I'll never forget the moment my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's such a shame my son married down." The entire table went silent. My husband's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His sister smirked into her wineglass. And his father? His father just nodded in agreement. This wasn't some private insult whispered in a hallway. This was at their monthly family dinner, in front of everyone. Like I wasn't even worth the courtesy of being humiliated in private. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than 48 hours, their entire world was about to collapse. And I was the one holding the match. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. My name is Elena, and I've been married to my husband James for 3 years. When we first met, I was working as an administrative assistant at a consulting firm. Nothing glamorous. Decent pay, but nothing that would make anyone's head turn. I answered phones, scheduled meetings, organized files, the kind of work that's absolutely essential but completely invisible. James, on the other hand, came from what you'd call old money. Not the flashy kind you see on reality TV, the quiet kind. The kind where wealth is so generational and so deeply rooted that talking about it is considered tacky. Country club memberships passed down like heirlooms. Vacation homes that have been in the family for decades. The kind of people who say things like summer as a verb. His mother, Patricia, had never worked a day in her life and wore that fact like a badge of honor. His father, Richard, was a retired executive who spent his days golfing and his evenings at private social clubs I didn't even know existed. And his sister, Victoria? She married a hedge fund manager and seemed to believe that made her royalty. From the very first time James brought me home to meet them, I could feel it. The way Patricia's eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering just a second too long on my off-brand handbag. The way Richard asked what my father did for work, and when I said he was a mechanic, the conversation just stopped. The way Victoria asked where I went to college, and when I said I'd gone to state school, she said, "Oh, how practical." But James loved me, and I loved him. He didn't care about any of that superficial nonsense. He saw me for who I was, hardworking, intelligent, and ambitious. He knew I was going back to school part-time to finish my degree. He knew I had plans. He knew I wasn't going to be an administrative assistant forever. So we got married despite his family's barely concealed disapproval. And for 3 years, I endured their passive-aggressive comments. Their jokes that weren't really jokes. Their casual cruelty disguised as concern. "You must be so tired from your little job. It's sweet that you're so independent. James is so generous to support your education." As if my working wasn't contributing to our household. As if my ambition was a character flaw. But I kept my mouth shut. I smiled. I played nice. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You tolerate their difficult family. Until that dinner. The monthly family dinners were Patricia's idea. "It's important to maintain family traditions," she'd say, as if forcing everyone to sit around her dining room table once a month was the glue holding civilization together. The dinners were always at their house, a sprawling estate with more rooms than any 3 people could possibly need. Crystal chandeliers, original oil paintings. The kind of home that felt more like a museum than a place where people actually lived. That particular evening started like all the others. Patricia greeting us at the door with air kisses that didn't quite touch cheeks. Richard in his study, nursing a scotch and barely acknowledging our arrival. Victoria and her husband already seated in the living room, discussing their recent trip to the French Riviera. "Elena!" Victoria called out when she saw me, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Still at that office job?" "Still working, yes," I said evenly. "How quaint," she replied. "I honestly don't know how you do it." Working and managing a household? I'd be absolutely exhausted. Her husband, Christopher, didn't even look up from his phone. James squeezed my hand, a silent apology, a silent plea for patience. I squeezed back. It's fine, I told him without words. I can handle it. Dinner was served precisely at 7:30. Patricia prided herself on punctuality. The dining room was immaculate, as always. Fine china that was probably worth more than my car. Crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Everything arranged with the kind of precision that made you afraid to touch anything. We took our usual seats, James and I on one side, Victoria and Christopher on the other, but Patricia at one head of the table, Richard at the other. The first course was a cold soup that I couldn't identify and didn't particularly enjoy. But I ate it, made the appropriate appreciative noises, played my role. So, Patricia began, her eyes fixed on me. James mentioned you're taking classes again? Yes, I said carefully. I'm finishing my degree. At your age? Victoria interjected with a laugh. Aren't you a little old to be a student? I'm 29. It's never too late to invest in education, I replied, keeping my voice measured. Of course not, Patricia said, in a tone that suggested she thought exactly the opposite. Though, I do wonder about the practicality of it. All that time and money, and for what? Will it really change anything? Richard cleared his throat. Patricia has a point. You have to consider return on investment. Will whatever degree you're pursuing actually lead to better opportunities? Or is it just, well, expensive personal enrichment? I felt my jaw tighten. It's a business degree, I said. And yes, it will lead to better opportunities. Business! Victoria laughed. Oh, that's ambitious. Are you hoping to become a manager somewhere? The way she said manager made it sound like I'd aspired to be a janitor. James finally spoke up. Elena's incredibly talented. Her professors have nothing but praise for her work. She's at the top of her class. That's wonderful, dear, Patricia said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Though I suppose at a state school, the competition isn't exactly fierce. The table went quiet. Christopher finally looked up from his phone, sensing the tension. Richard took a slow sip of his wine. Victoria's smirk widened, and I just sat there, fork in hand, trying to remember why I agreed to keep coming to these dinners. The main course was lamb. Expensive, perfectly cooked lamb that I could barely taste because my blood was boiling. You know what I find fascinating? Patricia continued, as if she hadn't just insulted me 30 seconds earlier. This modern obsession with women having careers? In my day, we understood that a woman's primary role was to support her husband and raise a family. We didn't need to find ourselves in some office. Times have changed, Mother, James said tightly. Have they? Richard interjected. Or have we just convinced ourselves that they have? Look at the divorce rates. Look at how many children are being raised by strangers in daycare centers. Perhaps the old ways had merit. I could feel James's frustration radiating off him. But he didn't push back hard enough. He never did. I work because I want to, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Not because I have to, but because I find fulfillment in it, and there's nothing wrong with that. No one's saying there's anything wrong with it, Victoria said sweetly. It's just, well, at a certain point, don't you want to start thinking about a family? You're not getting any younger, and James would make such a wonderful father. There it was, the other constant refrain. When are you going to give us grandchildren? When are you going to stop being so selfish and fulfill your biological purpose? Never mind that James and I had discussed waiting. Never mind that we had plans, goals, things we wanted to accomplish before bringing children into the world. Never mind that it was none of their business. "We'll have children when we're ready," I said firmly. "Of course," Patricia replied. "Though I do hope it's soon. James is already 32. We'd like to have grandchildren while we're still young enough to enjoy them." "You're only 65, Patricia," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "I think you have time." Her eyes flashed. Richard cleared his throat again, his signature move when he wanted to redirect a conversation. "Christopher was just telling us about his latest acquisition," he said. "A property in Aspen. Isn't that right, Christopher?" And just like that, the conversation shifted. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing real estate, investment portfolios, and people I'd never met who apparently mattered a great deal in their social circles. I was effectively invisible again, which was fine. I preferred it to being the center of their contempt. But then, dessert was served, and that's when Patricia delivered the line that changed everything. The dessert was some kind of elaborate chocolate creation that probably required a culinary degree to produce. I picked at it, my appetite completely gone. Victoria was in the middle of a story about her country club when Patricia suddenly turned to me. "Elena, dear, I've been meaning to ask you something." I looked up, immediately suspicious. Nothing good ever followed that tone. "What is it?" I asked. "Well, I was having lunch with some friends last week, and your name came up." My stomach dropped. "My name?" "Yes. Apparently, someone saw you at that little cafe on Westwood Avenue. You were having quite an animated conversation with someone, a man." The table went silent again. James's head snapped toward his mother. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Patricia said innocently. "I'm simply relaying what I was told. It just seemed odd, meeting with men in cafes when your husband is at work." I felt heat rising in my face. Not from guilt. I had nothing to feel guilty about, but from pure rage. "I have male colleagues," I said slowly. "I have male classmates. I have coffee with people as part of my professional and academic life. There's nothing odd about it." "Of course not," Patricia replied. "Though appearances do matter, dear. People talk, and in our circles, their reputation is everything." "Your circles aren't my circles," I said before I could stop myself. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Patricia's expression hardened. Richard's eyebrows rose. Victoria looked positively delighted. "Is that so?" Patricia said quietly. James grabbed my hand under the table, but I was beyond caring. "Yes," I said. "That's so. I don't move in country club circles. I don't spend my days shopping and lunching and gossiping about who was seen where with whom. I work, I study, I build a career, and I don't need anyone's permission or approval to do it." "How dare you?" Patricia breathed. "How dare I?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "How dare you? For 3 years, I have sat at this table and endured your passive-aggressive insults. Your condescension, your barely veiled contempt. I have smiled and nodded and played nice because I love your son, but I'm done." "Elena," James said, standing up as well, "let's just—" "No," I cut him off. "I'm not finished." I turned back to Patricia, and the words just flowed out. "You want to know what's wrong with your circles? You want to know why I don't care about them? Because they're full of people exactly like you. People who measure worth by bank accounts and pedigrees. People who think that because they were born into money, they're somehow superior to everyone else. People who have never worked for anything in their lives, but somehow think they're qualified to judge those who do." "Get out," Patricia hissed. "Gladly," I said. And then Patricia stood up, her face flushed, and delivered the line. "It's such a shame my son married down." The words hung in the air like poison. James looked stricken. Victoria looked triumphant. Richard just shook his head slowly, as if I'd confirmed everything he'd always suspected about me. And I just stood there, shaking with anger and humiliation, realizing that this family would never accept me, never respect me, never see me as anything more than the poor girl who trapped their precious son. I turned and walked out without another word. James followed me, apologizing profusely, begging me to wait, to talk, to let him make this right. But how could he? His mother had just said out loud what they'd all been thinking for 3 years. We drove home in silence, and I made a decision that night. I was done being ashamed of who I was. Done apologizing for not being born into the right family. I'm done letting them make me feel small because they had no idea who they were really dealing with. If you're already hooked, please hit that like button. Trust me, this story is just getting started. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone? Because what happens next? They never saw it coming. Here's what Patricia and her family didn't know about me. That little office job I had when James and I met, I left it 2 years ago. That business degree I was supposedly wasting time and money on, I finished it 1.5 years ago. Top of my class, full scholarship, academic honors, and for the past 18 months, I'd been working as a senior strategic consultant for one of the most powerful corporate restructuring firms in the country, Morrison Global Group. You might not have heard of us, but trust me, every major corporation in America has. We're the people CEOs call when their companies are failing, when they're hemorrhaging money, when they need to make hard decisions about restructuring, downsizing, or pivoting their entire business model. We're the people who walk into boardrooms and tell billionaires that they're running their companies into the ground. And I was one of their top consultants. My specialty? Family-owned businesses that had grown complacent. Companies where leadership positions were filled based on last names rather than competence. Businesses where the second and third generations had driven their grandparents' empires into near bankruptcy through incompetence and entitlement. Sound familiar? I hadn't told James the full extent of my success because I was afraid it would make things worse with his family. I know how that sounds, but I thought if I kept my head down, eventually they'd come around. Eventually, they'd see that I was more than what they assumed. I was wrong. So when I got home that night after the dinner from hell, still shaking with rage and humiliation, I made some calls. I called my boss, Harrison, at home. I didn't care that it was 10 at night. I didn't care that I was probably breaking some kind of professional boundary. I need to know something, I said when he answered. Elena, are you all right? The Hartwell account, the family business we've been circling for the past 6 months, the one that keeps refusing our consultation services. Tell me about them. There was a pause. Why? Just tell me. Harrison sighed. Hartwell Industries, manufacturing company, originally founded in the 1960s. The founder died 15 years ago, and his son took over. Revenue has been declining steadily for the past decade. They're burning through cash reserves. Another 2 years at their current rate, and they'll be bankrupt. But the family refuses to acknowledge they have a problem. My hands were shaking. What's the son's name? Richard Hartwell. Why are you? I hung up, and I started laughing. Not a happy laugh, a slightly unhinged laugh. The kind of laugh that emerges when the universe reveals a cosmic joke at your expense. Richard Hartwell, my father-in-law, the man who'd just sat at his dining room table, nodding along while his wife humiliated me, owned a failing company. A company that my firm had been trying to save. A company that was currently circling the drain because Richard was too proud, or too incompetent, to admit he needed help. I spent the entire next day at the office, pulling every file we had on Hartwell Industries. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. Richard had inherited a thriving manufacturing business from his father. They produced industrial components, nothing glamorous, but solid, reliable, profitable, the kind of business that quietly generated wealth for decades. But Richard had no idea how to run it. He'd kept his father's management team for the first few years, which kept things stable. But gradually, he'd replaced competent professionals with friends and family members. His nephew ran operations despite having zero manufacturing experience. His college roommate was CFO despite having barely passed accounting. And Richard himself? He showed up to the office maybe 3 days a week, spent more time at the golf course than in meetings, made decisions based on gut feeling rather than data. The result was predictable. Clients started leaving, quality declined, costs spiraled, revenue plummeted. But Richard had enough family wealth that he could keep propping up the company with personal funds. He could maintain the illusion that everything was fine. He could keep living in that massive house, driving luxury cars, maintaining memberships at exclusive clubs. He was burning through his inheritance to preserve his ego. And his family had no idea. Patricia thought they were still wealthy. Victoria thought her father was still a successful businessman. They had no idea that the empire was crumbling. But the really interesting part? The part that made this so deliciously ironic? Richard had been refusing our consultation services for months because he thought we were too aggressive and didn't understand family businesses. Translation: he was too proud to admit he needed help. Too proud to let outsiders tell him he was failing. Too proud to acknowledge that he was driving his father's legacy straight into bankruptcy. I spent hours poring over financial statements, balance sheets, cash flow projections, market analyses. And the more I read, the more I realized something. Hartwell Industries wasn't just failing. It was about to collapse completely. They had a major loan payment due in 4 months. A payment they couldn't possibly make with their current cash reserves. If they defaulted, the bank would call in all their debt. They'd be forced into bankruptcy. The company would be liquidated. Everything would be gone. And Richard had no plan, no contingency, no strategy. Just blind faith that somehow things would work out. That night, I sat James down and told him everything. About my real job, about my success, about how I'd been hiding it because I was afraid of making things worse with his family, and about Hartwell Industries. He stared at me in shock. "You're a senior consultant at Morrison Global?" "Yes." "For 18 months?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" I hesitated. "Because I knew how your family would react. They already thought I was beneath you. Can you imagine if they knew I was successful? They'd find some way to diminish it, to make it less than. And I was just, tired." James ran his hands through his hair, processing. "And my father's company is failing?" "It's not just failing, James. It's dying. Another few months, and it'll be over." "Does he know?" "He has to, but he's in denial. He keeps refusing help, refusing to acknowledge reality." James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" And I smiled. "I'm going to save the family business." I called Harrison the next morning and told him I wanted the Hartwell account. "Elena, we've been trying to crack that account for months. Richard Hartwell won't even take our calls anymore." "He'll take mine." "Why would he—" Harrison paused. "Wait, Hartwell. Your married name is Hartwell." "Richard is my father-in-law." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out. "Elena, that's a massive conflict of interest." "Is it?" I have no financial stake in the company. I'm not going to benefit personally from its success or failure. And I'm the only consultant in this firm who can get through the door. This could blow up in your face. Let me worry about that. Another pause. Then, if you pull this off, you'll make partner before you're 35. I know. Harrison laughed. All right, it's your funeral. But if you're doing this, you need to do it right. Full analysis, complete restructuring plan. And Elena, you can't go easy on him just because he's family. Trust me, I said. That won't be a problem. I spent the next 3 days building the most comprehensive business analysis I'd ever created. I outlined every single problem, every bad decision, every incompetent family member in a position they weren't qualified for, every wasted expense, every missed opportunity. I created a restructuring plan that was brutal but necessary. It involved replacing most of the leadership team, eliminating redundant positions, renegotiating supplier contracts, pivoting to more profitable product lines, cutting costs by 40%. It meant firing Richard's nephew, his college roommate, half the people he'd hired based on personal relationships rather than competence. It meant Richard stepping back from day-to-day operations and bringing in professional management. It meant swallowing his pride and accepting that he'd nearly destroyed his father's legacy. But it would save the company. When I was done, I had a 200-page report and a detailed presentation. And then I called Patricia. Patricia, it's Elena. A cold silence. Then, I have nothing to say to you. That's fine. You don't need to say anything. Just listen. I need to speak with Richard. It's about business. My husband has no business with you. Actually, he does. It concerns Hartwell Industries. Another pause. What are you talking about? I work for Morrison Global Group. We're a corporate restructuring firm, and Hartwell Industries is in serious trouble. I have information that Richard needs to hear. I could practically hear her mind working. You work for Morrison Global? Her voice had changed. Less hostile, more uncertain. Yes, I'm a senior strategic consultant, and I'm calling as a professional courtesy. Richard can meet with me or not. That's his choice. But this is the only call he's going to get. After this, Morrison Global moves on to other clients, and Hartwell Industries is on its own. I need to discuss this with Richard. You have 24 hours. I hung up. 20 hours later, I got a call from Richard's office. His secretary, speaking in a carefully neutral tone, said that Mr. Hartwell would see me the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock at his office. I smiled. Game on. Hartwell Industries was housed in a dated office building on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place that probably looked modern and impressive in 1985, but now just looked tired. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my most expensive suit. Hair pulled back, professional, polished. Every inch the successful consultant I'd become. The secretary looked surprised when I walked in. She was older, probably one of his father's original employees, still hanging on. Ms. Hartwell? She asked uncertainly. Yes, I have a 2 o'clock with Richard. Of course. He's expecting you. She said it like she couldn't quite believe it herself. Richard's office was exactly what I expected. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, photographs of him with various important-looking people, a large window overlooking the parking lot, and him sitting behind his massive desk, looking older than I remembered. Grayer, more tired. He stood when I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Elena, he finally said. Richard, please, sit. I sat across from him, placing my briefcase on the floor. I pulled out a tablet and a printed copy of my report. Thank you for seeing me, I said, my voice professional and cool. Patricia said you work for Morrison Global. I do, senior strategic consultant. I've been with them for 18 months. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Why didn't we know this? Because I didn't tell you. Because every time I tried to talk about my career, I was dismissed or talked over or insulted. So I stopped trying. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I see. Do you? Silence. Let me be very direct, Richard. Hartwell Industries is failing. You know it. Your board knows it. Or they would if you had an actual board instead of yes men. Your employees know it. And soon, your creditors are going to know it. His face reddened. Now wait, let me finish. My voice was sharp, commanding. The voice I used in boardrooms with CEOs who thought they could intimidate me. You have a major loan payment due in 4 months. $1.8 million? Your current cash reserves couldn't cover half of that. If you default, the bank will call in your entire debt. You'll be forced into bankruptcy. This company will cease to exist. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't I? I slid the printed report across the desk. This is a complete financial analysis of Hartwell Industries, revenue trends, cost structures, market positioning, competitive analysis, cash flow projections, everything. He stared at the report like it was a snake. Where did you get this information? I'm very good at my job, Richard. That's what you and your family never understood. While you were all assuming I was some mediocre girl from a mediocre background with a mediocre future, I was becoming one of the top consultants in corporate America. I let that sink in. Your company is dying, I continued. And it's dying because of you. Because you replaced competent professionals with incompetent family and friends. Because you make decisions based on ego instead of data. Because you're more interested in maintaining appearances than actually running a successful business. Get out, he said quietly. Not yet. I opened my tablet and pulled up a presentation. Because I'm not just here to tell you your company is failing. I'm here to tell you how to save it. Despite himself, his eyes flicked to the screen. I walked him through the restructuring plan. Every painful detail, every necessary cut, every difficult decision he'd have to make. His face grew darker with each slide. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. You want me to fire my nephew? He finally said. Your nephew is incompetent. He's running operations into the ground. He's family. So am I said sharply. Technically, but that didn't stop you and Patricia from treating me like garbage for 3 years. He flinched. This plan would gut the company, he said. This plan would save it. There's a difference. And if I refuse? I shrugged. Then in 4 months, you default on your loan. In 6 months, you're in bankruptcy. In 8 months, Hartwell Industries doesn't exist. Your father's legacy dies, your family loses everything, and you spend the rest of your life knowing you destroyed what he built. You seem to be enjoying this, he said bitterly. I'm not enjoying anything, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't see the irony. You spent years looking down on me, questioning my intelligence, my work ethic, my worth, and now I'm the only person who can save your family. Why would you? He asked. After how we treated you? It was a good question. I thought about it, about all the dinners, all the insults, all the casual cruelty, about Patricia's voice saying, It's such a shame my son married down. Because James loves you, I said finally. Because despite everything, he loves his family, and I love him. So I'm going to save your company, Not for you, but for him. I stood up, gathering my things. You have until Monday to decide. If you agree to the restructuring plan, Morrison Global will take you on as a client. I'll personally oversee the entire process. We'll renegotiate your loans, restructure your operations, and turn this company around. But it requires you to do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments, no ego, no family politics. And if I refuse, then this is the last conversation we'll ever have about Hartwell Industries. And you can explain to your wife and daughter why they're about to lose everything. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing, Richard. That dinner last week, when Patricia said, "I married down?" I want you to think about that phrase. Really think about it. Because the person who married down wasn't James. I left him sitting there, staring at the report on his desk. And I felt absolutely nothing. Okay, I need to know, are you Team Elena right now? Because I was shaking when this happened. Please drop a comment if you think she's doing the right thing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story gets even better. The weekend was torture. James was anxious, pacing our apartment like a caged animal. He'd called his father multiple times, but Richard wasn't answering. Patricia wasn't answering. Even Victoria had gone radio silent. "What did you say to him?" James kept asking. I told him the truth. Which truth? All of them. Sunday night, James finally got through to his father. I couldn't hear Richard's side of the conversation, but I could hear James. Yes, I knew. No, I didn't tell you because you never asked about her work. She's been trying to tell you for months, but you kept cutting her off. It doesn't matter how I feel. What matters is whether you're going to accept her help. It went on for over an hour. When James finally hung up, he looked exhausted. He wants to meet with both of us. Tomorrow morning? At the house. Both of us? He says the whole family needs to be there. My stomach twisted. James, I don't think... Please, he said. Just, please. I nodded. Monday morning, we drove to his parents' house in silence. When we arrived, both of his parents' cars were in the driveway. So was Victoria's Mercedes. James squeezed my hand before we went inside. Patricia answered the door. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in a week. Her eyes were red, probably from crying. When she saw me, her face did something complicated. Shame, anger, fear, all mixed together. "Elena," she said quietly. "Patricia, please come in." The living room felt different than it had a week ago. Less museum-like, more human, more vulnerable. Richard was sitting in his usual chair. Victoria was on the couch, looking subdued. Christopher was notably absent. Apparently, this was family only. We all sat down. The silence was deafening. Richard spoke first. "I spent the weekend reviewing your report," he said, not looking at me. "Every page, every number, every recommendation." He paused, and I saw his hands trembling slightly. "It's comprehensive, thorough, brutal, and completely accurate." Patricia made a small sound. "I've been lying to myself," Richard continued, "and lying to this family. The company isn't doing well. It hasn't been doing well for years. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I just needed more time, that things would turn around." "Richard," Patricia whispered, but he held up a hand. "No, let me finish." He finally looked at me. "You were right about everything. About the bad hires, the poor decisions, the wasted money. All of it." Victoria's eyes were wide with shock. "I called my accountant this weekend," Richard said. "Asked him for a completely honest assessment of our financial situation, personal and business." He took a breath. "If the company goes bankrupt, we lose everything. The house, the club memberships, the vacation properties, all of it. Everything is tied up in the business, either as collateral for loans or because I've been using personal funds to keep it afloat. Patricia gasped. Richard, you said we were fine. You said, I know what I said. He cut her off. I was wrong. I was too proud to admit the truth, too ashamed to ask for help. He turned back to me. I accept your terms, all of them. Morrison Global can take over the restructuring. You can implement your entire plan. Fire whoever needs to be fired. Make whatever changes need to be made. Just save my father's company. Please. The please hung in the air. It was the first time Richard had ever asked me for anything. The first time he'd acknowledged I had something he needed. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, satisfied. Instead, I just felt tired. There's something else you need to know, Richard said. He looked at Patricia, then back at me. I called Harrison Morrison personally, had a long conversation with him about you, about your career. My spine straightened. He said you're one of the most talented consultants he's ever worked with. Said you've turned around 3 companies in 18 months. Said clients specifically request you. Said you're on track to make partner by 35. Richard's voice cracked slightly. He also said you've been deflecting credit for your work because you didn't want family drama affecting your career. That you've been downplaying your success so it wouldn't cause problems with us. Patricia was crying now silently. He said, Richard continued, that when you took this case, you fought to keep me as a client. That other consultants wanted to write Hartwell Industries off as unsalvageable. But you insisted there was a path forward. You spent extra hours, did extra research, built a more comprehensive plan than anyone expected. He stood up, and I realized he was fighting tears. You had every reason to let my company fail, to let me lose everything. After how we treated you, you would have been justified in walking away. Yes, I said simply. I would have been. Why didn't you? I looked at James, at the man I loved who'd been caught between his wife and his family for 3 years, who'd tried so hard to keep everyone happy and ended up satisfying no one. Because families are complicated, I said, and flawed and hurtful. But they're still family, and sometimes you save them despite themselves. The restructuring of Hartwell Industries took 6 months. It was brutal. Richard's nephew was let go. His college roommate was replaced with a competent CFO. Half the management team was either fired or demoted. Richard himself stepped back from day-to-day operations, bringing in a professional CEOI personally vetted. We renegotiated contracts, cut costs, streamlined operations, pivoted product lines. Richard showed up to every meeting, asked questions, took notes, actually listened to the experts he was paying. And slowly, painfully slowly, the company stabilized. They made their loan payment, then another. Revenue started climbing. Client relationships improved. By month 6, Hartwell Industries was profitable again. Not explosively so, but sustainably. The crisis was over. As for the family, Patricia apologized. A real apology, not the kind where someone says, I'm sorry you felt that way. She sat me down one afternoon and said, I was wrong about you, about your worth, about your intelligence, about everything. I let my prejudices blind me, and I'm deeply sorry. Victoria apologized too, though hers was more awkward, less comfortable with emotional vulnerability, but genuine nonetheless. The monthly family dinners continued, but they were different now. They asked about my work, actually asked, and actually listened to the answers. They stopped making comments about children or careers or what I should be doing with my life. And when Patricia's friends asked what I did, she said, with obvious pride, Elena is a senior consultant at Morrison Global. She saved my husband's company. It wasn't perfect. Families never are. There were still moments of tension, still old habits that surfaced occasionally, but it was better. 8 months after that terrible dinner, Morrison Global announced their new partners. There were 3 of us, all under 35, all rising stars. And I was one of them. The announcement came on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, my phone was flooded with messages. Congratulations from colleagues, interview requests from industry publications, and a text from Patricia. Dinner this weekend? We'd like to celebrate. Your choice of restaurant. I smiled at that. Your choice. Saturday evening, we all gathered at an upscale restaurant in the city. Not Patricia's choice. Mine. A place where I felt comfortable, where I belonged. We were seated at a large table, James and me, Patricia and Richard, Victoria and Christopher. A toast, Richard said, raising his glass. To Elena, to her talent, her dedication, and her grace in dealing with a family that didn't deserve it. We all drank. I have something for you, Patricia said, sliding an envelope across the table. I opened it, confused. Inside was a check, a large check, made out to me personally. What is this? When the restructuring is complete, Richard said, Hartwell Industries will have recovered over $15 million in value. That's $15 million that would have been lost if not for you. This is 1%, $150,000. Your consulting fee only covered the billable hours. This is for everything else, for caring when you didn't have to, for saving us. I stared at the check, overwhelmed. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Victoria said quietly. You earned it. I looked around the table at these people who'd made my life hell for 3 years, who'd questioned my worth at every turn, who'd made me feel small and insufficient and less than. And I realized something. They'd changed. Really changed. Not because I'd proven myself, though that helped, but because they'd been forced to confront their own failures, their own prejudices, their own cruelty. They'd looked into the mirror and hadn't liked what they saw. And that's the thing about humility. You can't lecture it into someone. You can't demand it. You can't force it. They have to discover it themselves, usually through humiliation of their own. Thank you, I said, folding the check and putting it in my purse. I do accept it, not because I need it, but because it represents something important: respect, recognition, an acknowledgement of value. You always had value, James said softly, squeezing my hand. I know, I replied. But now everyone else knows it too. 3 years later, I'm writing this from my corner office at Morrison Global. Partner at 32, just like Harrison predicted. Hartwell Industries is thriving. Richard officially retired last year, handing the company over to the professional management team completely. The company's value has tripled since the restructuring. James and I have a daughter now, 1-year-old. And Patricia babysits her twice a week and is, surprisingly, an absolutely wonderful grandmother. The family dinners still happen once a month, but now they're warm, inclusive, sometimes even fun. People always ask me if I've forgiven them. The answer is complicated. I've moved past it. I don't carry the anger anymore. But forgiveness? That's a daily choice, not a one-time decision. Some days, I remember Patricia's words, "Marry down," and I still feel that sharp sting. Other days, I watch her playing with our daughter, see the genuine joy in her eyes, and the past feels very far away. What I've learned is this: people will always make assumptions about you. They'll underestimate you, judge you, try to make you feel small. You can't control that, but you can control who you become in response to it. You can let it break you, or you can let it forge you into something stronger. You can become bitter, or you can become better. I chose better. And when the people who doubted you finally see who you really are, when they're forced to confront their own prejudice and ignorance, that's not revenge. That's justice. Sometimes the best comeback isn't words, it's becoming undeniable. If this story moved you, please leave a like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Let them know their time is coming. And drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in Elena's position? Would you have helped the family that humiliated you? Or would you have walked away? I read every single comment, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening to my story.